joining us for this discussion around the ABCs of CPM. I'm Michelle Van Helmont from Accordion, and on behalf of our team and the team at OneStream, we're looking forward to a very informative and productive hour ahead. As the go-to partner for private capital-backed companies, Accordion has been working across the board with the leading technologies that our clients are leveraging as they professionalize and they make the push for digital transformation of their operations. CPM tools, or corporate performance management tools, play a critical role in this digitalization path for these companies. And in private equity-backed situations, it's even more important given the increased scrutiny around the accuracy and timeliness of data. So for today, we plan on exploring some of the key questions that we commonly hear that our clients face around selection, implementation, and the optimal usage of these type of tools. Before we dive in, just want to cover a quick few items regarding the webinar. You'll notice that your cameras and your audio are off. That's so that we can properly showcase our moderator and our panelists and not run into any of those faux pas that we've seen so often over the last year and a half. That being said, we still want to foster a very interactive environment. So please feel free to select all panelists and attendees if you'd like to add any insight to the discussion. We'd love to hear it. We'll leave time at the end for some Q&A. So if you think of a question, please hit your Q&A button. You can also do this anonymously as well if you'd like to submit that way. And we are recording this webinar. So for some reason you have to jump out, leave early, we will have the full session recorded and happy to follow up. With that said, I'd love to hand it over to my colleague, Mike Cochran, who is Accordion's head of CFO Technology, to take us away today and kick us off. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. So pleasure to speak with all of you today. We have a jam-packed schedule of content, so we'll be moving probably pretty quickly through the presentation. I have the privilege of introducing some individuals who will also be speaking with us today. First, Troy Anderson, who's CFO of UTI, Universal Technology Institute. They're the leading provider of technical training in the automotive industry, marine, motorcycle, collision repair, welding, and they'll be sharing with you some of the concepts and how they were applied within the organization as it relates to some of the concepts that I'll be talking about earlier. And then finally, also joined by one of our partners from OneStream, Dave Collins, who, as you can see, is a Director of Solutions and Global Alliances. And the idea there is also to actually be able to show you from a platform perspective, OneStream in a demo capacity. It'll be a very quick demo, so I'll encourage you to stick around to the end, but then also if there's interest in seeing more of that, we'll give you some information on how to get back in contact with us. So without further delay, we'll jump into the presentation. So we're going to approach the conversation from a couple different ways. One, I don't want to presume anything in terms of maybe folks' knowledge of where CPM or corporate performance management sits within the broader digital enablement of the Office of Finance. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then really we're going to focus the discussion more so in a majority of the conversation today on where CPM within the context of the private equity market, and more specifically the portcos for which GP sponsorship is involved, really in many ways is even a stronger solution than what you might even find in the upmarket or multi-billion-dollar organizations, and why portfolio companies should consider it as part of their overall strategy as they look to digital enable finance as a transformational initiative. And then really, I know, obviously, as all of you are probably keenly aware, it's all about value creation. So there's certainly, obviously, an investment that we'll talk about as it relates to instantiating CPM solutions within your organization. So where's the value prop? Where does the benefit come from it? Where does the value creation equation land? So we'll be spending a little bit of time on that. And at that point, we'll turn it over to Troy, like I said earlier, to go over a case study as it relates to how they're strategically leveraging the platform within the execution of Office of Finance duties. And then finally, like I mentioned, Dave will be doing the demo. So let's define CPM for a second. There's lots of different definitions of CPM, but really as it relates to what we're going to be talking about today, CPM solutions represent a suite of technologies, specifically those that represent close consolidation, budgeting, forecasting, strategic modeling, and financial reporting. And they really complement in many ways the ERP solutions that most of you probably have within your organizations, and the analytical reporting environment, or also known as maybe your data warehouse, your data lake, and data marts. But in terms of a definition perspective, it's still a little tough to understand, well, how does CPM complement some of these other solutions? So in the context of kind of going through this, I wanted to first put out the first polling question as it relates to what we'll be talking about here. And what I really like to understand is, from a platform perspective, what is your current organization using to support the financial plan and forecast modeling, as well as the reporting environment? And the poll should be popped up. Hopefully everybody can see it on your screen. We'll give it a second here for you to respond, and then we'll talk to the results of this here in a second. Okay, that should be hopefully good. Appreciate everybody's feedback. Let's see what the results are. All right, so a majority, 37%, are in fact using corporate performance management tools. Wow, that's awesome. Several of you then are also leveraging a combination of spreadsheets in the general ledger. I suspect in that particular instance, you're using the spreadsheets to actually do the modeling of the forecast and budget, and then dropping it into a ledger as it relates to consolidating it and being able to perform some degree of reporting off of it. And then a large portion, which I'm not surprised of you, are using spreadsheets still today to support the budgeting and forecasting process. So pretty consistent with what we see out there in the market space. I'm real pleased to see actually a number of you currently still already using CPM tools. So you're already a little bit ahead of the curve on some of the discussion today. So I'm going to spend some time talking about, like, from a spreadsheet perspective, in the course of this discussion, how, while maybe the quickest, fastest way to stand up some CPM competencies within your organization may not be the goal state in terms of creating the value that you're trying to accomplish as it relates to your GP sponsorship. So as we kind of go through this here, I think everybody understands where ERP plays within the context of your overall financial system stack. Obviously supporting the back end operations of finance, whether that be in the form of accounts receivable, accounts payable, fixed assets, the general ledger, the whole order to cash, procure to pay, record to report. So there's really no confusion about that. And I think on the other side of the equation, most individuals have a pretty clear and consensus understanding of what analytical reporting from a data warehouse and data mart and data lake support for the organization. But there's this other aspect of financial systems that truly obviously needs to be considered from an Office of Finance perspective, and that's around closed consolidation, budgeting, and forecasting. The tricky part about those particular solutions in particular is they share an operational sense to it, just like the ERP does, insofar as it's an interactive system. You're obviously not just reporting off the information, but you're obviously, whether it's through applying intercompany transfers, judgments, topsides, eliminations as it relates to the close, or certainly interacting with it as you're putting together your strategic plan or modeling out your forecast, there's an operational nature, an interactive nature to it. Likewise, CPM solutions have a very strong analytical and reporting capability. So there is oftentimes a situation where organizations will say, look, we have an ERP, we have a data warehouse. Can't we just close in one of those? Can't we just do our budgeting and forecasting in one of those solutions, maybe augmented with some spreadsheets? And really, that's where CPM comes into play. Corporate performance management solutions are purpose-built applications to support what I've been suggesting here, the closed consolidation and budgeting and forecasting. And I think, as you'll see, not only through the dialogue today, but then also the testimony of Troy and further substantiated by the OneStream demo, that just in so much as an organization wouldn't try to operate without an ERP, and just in so much as an organization shouldn't try to operate very effectively without analytical and reporting capabilities, likewise, the same should be considered as it relates to closed consolidation and budgeting and forecasting. I like to use analogies, and this one's just kind of a fun one because sometimes it's still a little difficult for people to understand why, when, and where to use CPM. But if you were to take, the organization as a whole and analogize it against a car, the ERP would be the engine in the car. Basically meaning every organization that I'm sure is on this webinar today has an ERP of some sort. Whether it's NetSuite, Sage Intacct, Great Plains, Microsoft Dynamics. I could go on and on. Everybody's going to have one. Every functioning car has an engine, right? Likewise, on the analytics and reporting side, that's really the dashboard of your car. So whether it's your tachometer, your fuel gauge, your speedometer, you can operate a car without some of those gauges actually working. I remember actually my first car in college, the gas gauge didn't work. So what I ended up doing is putting a pad of paper in the seat next to me, and I would write down my odometer when I filled up with gas, and I knew I had about 250 miles to go. So you compensate when you don't have good gauges, but I think we can all agree that the operations of a car are far better and more efficient if you've got the analytical reporting on the dash gauges. But those are really point in time kind of information, like how fast are you going right now? How much fuel do you have right now? CPM solutions are more like your GPS system in your car, or your Waze or maps on the Apple phone, meaning you're plotting a course to where you need to get, and the CPM system is going to help you model how to best and most efficiently get there. And moreover, when some unforeseen event occurs, like say, for example, the COVID crisis, what do we do at that point? How do we react? How do we pivot? How do we best adapt? Again, these are things that you might akin to a GPS system. And this is really where CPM kind of fits within the context overall. So when you boil that down a little bit further, as again relates to CPM, broadly speaking, it supports the financial close process, which is the whole where we are right now, as well as the planning and forecasting process on how do we get to where we need to go. So if you kind of just take planning and forecasting for a second, like I just mentioned, modeling alternative scenarios is just like when you punch into your GPS that you're going to your kid's house for the holidays. What's the best way to go? Is there one with toll roads? Is it the fastest route, the quickest route, the least expensive route? All of that is kind of what you would do within the context of an overall CPM solution. You monitor your progress to that target. So how are you tracking in terms of distance until you get to your destination? It also allows you to really look at the financial impacts, which again would be kind of like with Waze when they say there's a traffic jam up ahead, consider this alternate route. That's again where a CPM solution would come into play. I'd argue that as I go through these would be difficult functions to employ within an ERP system, a data warehouse, maybe a little bit within the context of spreadsheets, but as you start to model out corrective actions, multiple scenarios, and also bring in things like operational context, like operating data side by side with your financial data. And again, the analogy here is where's the nearest gas station up ahead. Those are tough to do. Those are tough things to do within the context of some of the other systems within your financial stack, ERPs, analytics, and spreadsheets. This is where CPM fits within the broader spectrum, purpose-built to support these functions. So let's talk about now, turn our attention a little bit more towards why, from a private equity Portco sponsored situation, should we really be looking at CPM? CPM solutions have been around for a very long time, well into 2 decades, probably more like 3 decades, if you consider kind of the definition of when they originated. Most large multi-million-dollar organizations have well thought out strategies and solutions in place around this. It's only been really within the context of the last couple of years with the advent of the cloud that really these solutions have come down to a price point in a subscription-based model for organizations in more the mid-market range to be able to take advantage of these solutions. And the OneStream solution you'll be hearing about today is certainly one of those in the context of a cloud deployment. But really, when you think about private equity, I guess most of you on this call are going to be in that space. You guys, in many ways, have more complex architectures than, say, even the upmarket multi-billion-dollar organizations. And the reason why that is because in many cases you have roll-ups, you have carve-outs, you have situations where there's large acquisitions in play, and you end up having complex technical architectures, multiple general ledgers, multiple back-end operating system, multiple financial systems in place. And because of that, you ultimately need to have a strategy to be able to bring that together, that data together in some kind of capacity, especially from the Office of Finance perspective, to be able to do proper reporting and analysis. Additionally, the rate of change, which you have within your organizations, in many cases far exceeds what we see in the larger, more upscale business in terms of multi-billion-dollar organizations. That's all because part of the value creation. So you're obviously in a point where we're in acquisition mode. You're bringing in new organizations with new charts of accounts, with new organizational alignments, with new product lines, with new channels, and the ability to be able to allow for some of that autonomy, while at the same time, the mandate of the finance office, obviously, is to be able to provide some stewardship and controls around that data. Is a tightrope walk that you guys all have to balance. Another reason why CPM solutions, as you'll see as we go through this conversation, something to consider. You have an accelerated time to value schedule. Again, in contrast to maybe larger organizations, there's usually an event that's somewhere on your horizon if you're a private equity backed organization. You don't have the 2-year, 3-year time frame to maybe establish a 12 to 18 month kind of project. You're looking at time horizons that are more in the 3-month, 4-month time horizons. We can stand up CPM solutions and add these types of values that I've been going through here today in those time schedules. And as I mentioned just a second ago, there's that balance of operational autonomy with instituting still the transparencies and controls around finance. And we'll talk about that here in a second, especially as it relates to maybe letting the business units for which they're in an acquisition mode remain on their existing GLs, while at the same time employing a CPM solution to be able to standardize the financial schedules, as well as a chart of accounts to be able to have the financial transparency and operational reporting needed as a CFO within one of these portcos. And there's also a situation where obviously in many cases, portcos are working with a lot leaner teams. You have limited resources, not only within the Office of Finance, but generally within the context of your IT departments. And being able to put a solution in place quickly that has a very low level of support required is going to be key. And again, I think you'll see as we go through this discussion today, that you'll find that CPM solutions fit that model. So let's dispel some myths. There's a few, I guess, ideas or concepts out there in some ways that sometimes prevent organizations from really looking at a CPM solution within the context of the organization. And I'll go through each one of these quickly. One is that, it might take too much time before we see the value in the solution. We could generate some spreadsheets very quickly. We know we have the team in place to be able to do it. The time to value is so rapid here that I'm not sure it makes sense for us to explore a CPM solution. So we'll talk about that. There's a thought sometimes out there that CPM focuses on financial data and not operational data. Additionally, we don't need a CPM since we're migrating to one ERP. Why do we need to close our books any other place in the ERP if we're not a complex environment like I was talking about earlier in terms of multiple GLs? The integration of acquisitions is going to be a challenge for us. And the idea of maybe introducing a technology into the equation might prevent us from being more reactive and agile as we attract acquisitions and bring them into the fold of our overall organization. And then CPM solutions require a significant amount of technical support. So let's take each one of these and kind of walk them through. So first one, technology implementations take too long. We have an aggressive timeline. It's easier just to continue using spreadsheets. Nothing could be further from the truth. There are CPM projects that can take a while. That is one of the reasons why that is because CPM solutions like the OneStream solution you're going to see today are highly customizable to the businesses for which they represent, regardless of vertical, regardless of size of organization, regardless whether domestic or international businesses, but they don't have to be. They only are going to be that way if you don't follow some particular parameters here. First off, think of the solution from a configuration versus customization perspective. One of the things Dave's going to be talking about later on during his portion of the discussion is pre-built frameworks that you can employ within the context of a solution that are configurable. Now, will that necessarily match up with 100% of how your organization is doing everything today? The truthful answer is no. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. But if we attack it from more of a configuration perspective and make tweaks to the configuration, I promise you'll, one, be able to deploy the solution in a lot more cost-effective and time frame productive manner, but it will also be a much more simplistic solution to maintain going forward. And I will argue that it's negligible many times the amount of basis points difference you'll get out of the accuracy of a budget and forecasting based on some of the customizations that organizations try to put into these solutions. Error on the side of going more the configuration route and foregoing maybe a basis point of precision versus trying to customize and squeeze out, that very precise number for all the reasons I just mentioned. And then really from a minimal viable product perspective and a phase-based implementation, these kind of go hand in hand. The idea is to get quick to the value. So CPM solutions like OneStream in particular lend themselves to be more of a phase-based implementation. We've decide on and through requirements gathering and design, identify what are those high priority feature functionality that needs to be deployed quickly. And we can, like I said, can stand those up in say 3 or 4 month timeframes and then continue to layer on in a phase-based manner the additional functionality. That really is the prescribed best practices way of implementing solutions, not only from a usability perspective, but from an implementation perspective. And then though we might be implementing in a phase-based implementation, don't forego the thought of doing a common design phase up front. So for example, maybe revenue planning is the highest priority for your organization. Ultimately, you want to use the platform in total to do close consolidation, account reconciliation, transaction matching, full P&L, balance sheet, and automated cash flow. But revenue planning was your highest priority. When you go to take on that project, do a common design of all of that functionality first, but then attack it in a phase-based implementation like I've been suggesting. So don't just jump into doing revenue planning without knowing what the end game is associated with the entire solution. Completing the source to target chart of accounts mapping is an exercise I would highly recommend that everybody does before engaging in the project, especially if you're in a multi-GL environment. That is an exercise that can easily be done without sourcing external resources. It's certainly an exercise that's going to be one of the first things that we would do if engaged on a project like this. So again, in terms of speed of bringing a solution to market on the CPM side, having that mapped out already from source to target across the multiple GLs, if you do have that kind of environment, would be a recommendation. And then another big one, and I see this happen a lot, and I'm constantly working with our customer base on, is don't forget what CPM is intended to do. CPM is about budgeting, forecasting, close and consolidation, and financial reporting. It is not the end to be all reporting analytic environment for your entire organization. That's really more like your data warehouse or your data marts, your data lakes. They can get confusing sometimes because when you see the reporting capability that comes out of these CPM solutions in support of in-process reporting as it relates to close consolidation and budgeting and forecasting, you can sometimes slide down the path of starting to put too much into these CPM solutions and forget that this data that I'm putting in here really isn't in support of the close process. This data I'm putting in here really is not in support of driver-based planning. I somehow, some way got to the point where I started to think of my CPM solution as my data warehouse. Resist doing that. It's just one of the pitfalls to be mindful of if you want to deploy a solution very quickly within the context of this discussion. CPM solutions can help me produce my financials, but really don't do much for me on my operational reporting side. The truth of the matter is most really good CPM solutions will bring in operational data and marry it with the financial data. And the ability to model multiple scenarios on a driver-based basis is really what's core to the functionality of CPM. And having those operational metrics side by side with the financials is really something that CFOs of portcos that have obviously private equity backed sponsorship are asked to do, if not demanded to do in the context of servicing their duties. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be complementary platforms for the supplemental operational data. This again would be more like the data warehouse and data marts. So we do bring some operational data into the CPM solution, but it's really more in the context of what you need to do your financial close reporting, as well as driver-based information to support the financial lines that you're modeling as it relates to your forecast and plan. All right, second poll. If your organization currently supports multiple ERP instances, what is your go-forward strategy in terms of what you're going to do about those multiple ERPs? Here are the choices. So we currently are already on one standardized ERP instance. Migrate organizations. We're going to migrate our organization to one ERP instance. We're going to allow for multiple ERPs to exist, or we're still trying to determine what the best strategy is here. Okay, let's see what we got. All right, we are currently on one ERP instance. Looks like that's the winner. That's good. We're still determining our best strategy, which I know that's difficult. We'll talk about, I guess my appreciation of why that's difficult. And then in many cases, you guys are migrating to 24% are saying they're migrating the organization to a single ERP. And then least of which you're allowing for the multiple ERPs to exist. Okay, so let's keep going here. And there's a myth that a lot of times in order to streamline finance, we need to migrate to a singular ERP platform and common GL. The nice thing about going to one ERP and GL is that obviously you have all your financials obviously in one place, regardless of the business unit. The challenge with that is, especially if you're an organization with multiple ERPs or GLs at this point in time, is that can sometimes be a heavy lift. And it also can be a somewhat intrusive process to the business operations of the organizations for which you're shifting off of their native GL to the target GL. I would argue that there's another option here. We can leave the businesses on their existing GLs, because the reason why we want to move them to the GLs, to singular GL most kinds, is because we feel like that's the way we can institute standards and controls that the Office of Finance needs to have in place. Another option is obviously leave these businesses on their GLs and use a CPM solution like OneStream to pull the data in and support those standards and controls that the Office of Finance needs around close consolidation, planning, forecasting, and financial reporting, while allowing the organizations in a non-disruptive way to have some degree of autonomy in how they manage their business from a finance and GL perspective. So it is just an option here. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong solution here, but many organizations are employing the instantiation of a CPM solution as a much quicker way to get those standards in place around Office of Finance versus migrating everybody within the organization to one ERP. Given our aggressive acquisition strategy, we are going to have to leverage one of our GLs and or spreadsheets to consolidate our plan reports until we can integrate the acquired entity. Not necessarily true. When it comes to integrating acquisitions and so forth, the good and the bad of it is that the general ledger, obviously we all know, was purpose built for sort of the back office operations of finance. It's not particularly good and was never really intentionally built to support some of the processes for which CPM targets: close, consolidation, planning, and forecasting. But we can make it work. But where it kind of starts to fall down a little bit are things like if you've got a lot of intercompany transfers. For example, if we're doing constant currency analysis by removing the FX rate associated with our variance analysis, I go on, but there's just places that, well, we're doing this in our GL, so we're just going to have to forego the fact of some of this analysis and or the level of detail we want to put into our close that we'd otherwise would like to do if we had a purpose-built system. Moreover, then spreadsheets, while being maybe a little bit more flexible than GL because it doesn't have the rigors and structure that an application would have, it that would obviously be a part of an ERP, spreadsheets lack the controls that you need to institute in terms of standards. Moreover, you then end up with, and I'm not going to ask this polling question, those of you that are on spreadsheets right now, how many sheet tabs are in those spreadsheets? And does everybody have a clear understanding of all the logic in those spreadsheets so that if we need to make a modification, which again, private equity backed portcos tend to be in a high rate of flux, we're afraid to actually go into the spreadsheets and make modifications because we don't want to break them. That's why spreadsheets aren't particularly good. That's why general ledgers aren't good. This is a key component of why considering a CPM solution, which again brings the rigors and controls into the equation, while at the same time has the ability to support from a purpose function perspective, the financial close, consolidation, planning, and forecasting. Given the limited size of our team, I'm reluctant to introduce a CPM solution for which IT will ultimately need to support. Again, this one comes up a lot too, okay? The reality is that most CPM systems are largely supported by the Office of Finance. accounting or finance individuals in particular. Admittedly, they're best supported by individuals that have a background in accounting or finance, that have a technical savvy associated with them. Think of them like the individuals in your office. I know everybody will, somebody will come to mind when I give you this description, but it's that person within finance or accounting that's really, really good with spreadsheets. Probably even knows how to do VBA macros and put buttons on the sheets and really turn them into more than just the rudimentary spreadsheet where you've got calculations and you're changing numbers. If you have that individual within your organization, those are the best resources to be the support arm of the CPM solution, specifically the OneStream one you're going to see here in a second. There is no infrastructure associated with these solutions. They're cloud-based solutions. So there's no data centers, there's no servers, there's no operating systems. That is all taken care of by the software provider. So again, diminishes the role of IT. From a steady state support perspective, usually it's only a part-time role too in support of this. Very rarely, if it's in a steady state, do you need a full-time resource administrating these systems. There is an outsource option as well. So many organizations will obviously provide the ability to be able to outsource it, but actually more often than not, we see individual organizations bringing this competency in-house because again, it is so minimal. Where IT does sometimes get involved is when we're integrating new data sources. So I'm not to suggest that IT has no involvement here. If we're integrating a GL, in many cases, they don't have to get involved because we're just pulling down the trial balances and bringing it into the system. And most organizations from an accounting and finance perspective have that competency to do. But if we are tapping into operational data that would require maybe sourcing information from a data warehouse or a data lake or a third party subscription-based firm, yes, maybe IT is going to get involved there. But the myth that it's a heavy IT laden system is really not true. Okay. So from a value proposition perspective, and this is really obviously where value creation comes into play, there's obviously a cost associated with deploying CPM solutions. There is a software subscription cost. There's a configuration cost if you don't configure it internally through using organizations like Accordion. And there is a support cost associated with it. So even while it be minimal, there is going to be time that's going to be allocated from an administration team to support and maintain the system. But from a benefits perspective, organizations generally see multiples in terms of recouping their investment on the cost that they spend associated with these solutions, both in hard dollars and soft dollars. The hard dollars really come in the way of resource optimization. Again, more so probably in portcos that are backed by private equity firms, is there's this need to do more with the same or less. You were privately held last month. Now you have private equity, GP sponsorship. There's all these ideas of what we want to do with the organization in terms of creating value, but we also want to be very cost conscious. So this idea of doing more with the same or less is certainly a paradigm that plays out in the private equity space. With the instantiation of a CPM solution, you have the ability to direct talent to activities that are more value add, and I'll talk about that here. We also have the ability to do business unit comparisons, establishing best practices and really look at for cost takeout. So especially if you have common business units, the ability to do the slicing and dicing of this data inside the context of these solutions from a reporting analysis perspective often yields benefits whereby we can say, okay, business unit A is running this particular operation more effectively than business unit B. What are they doing? Now that we can see that here in the context of our reporting, we can employ those strategies appropriately across both business units, which really then creates economies of scale. And then you can create shared services models. So again, if you're in an acquisition laden kind of organization, you may have 5 different offices of finance, all of which are doing spreadsheets, all of which have their own GL system, all of which need individuals because it's a labor intensive process to manage through all that. Layering a CPM solution in place, you can create a shared services model and look for applying the resources within those other organizations more to value add procedures, as you don't need as many individuals to do the data collection, consolidation, and they can spend more time on the analysis and reporting side. And then obviously on the soft dollar side, these are the ones that are a little harder to actually put kind of physical numbers to, but realigning work, like I mentioned earlier, to higher value functions, decreasing data collection and increasing analysis and support of the business. And then really having informed investment of resources, not only in capital, but human resources as well, in terms of what product lines, channels, operations, manufacturing side are really the areas where we're making money, and we can dial and turn the levers in a driver-based planning solution to see what the impact would be on our financial projections. And an impact analysis. So being able to understand a course corrective action earlier than later. Think of COVID, for example. Nobody saw that one coming. Suddenly, a lot of organizations that were using spreadsheets to model their budget and forecast found themselves at a disadvantage to the individuals at CPM Solutions, because it was very difficult for them to model out 15 different scenarios: the best case, worst case, average case. What do we do with furloughs? Do we look at maybe a reduction in force strategy versus furloughs? What are the implications of both? Running dozens and dozens of models is something not easily done in spreadsheets, impossible to do in an ERP general ledger, I might say. Absolutely perfectly aligned with what we would do in a CPM system. So, all right. I will now turn it over to Troy. Yep, you came on there. So Troy, over to you. Thank you again for your time today.
Great, thanks, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. And for those of you who are trying to figure out what's over my shoulder here, those are welding booths in one of our facilities. So Mike already gave the introduction on UTI, and I'll skip that apart. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to the team here, and a lot of what's been discussed so far is directly relevant to our CPM and transformation story. I joined the company in 2019 as the company was coming out of a number of very lean years, including 7 straight years of revenue decline. While we're a publicly traded company and not a PE portfolio company, we are a small cap, and we do have a large PE investor through a preferred investment. We currently deliver our education through, can you flip to the next slide, please? Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks. We currently deliver our education through 12 campuses across the US. Each campus location is a standalone P&L, but we run our operations in a hybrid model of campus-specific and centralized delivery and support teams, along with our corporate functions. As additional context for this discussion, we're executing on a growth and diversification strategy that includes organically adding new campuses and programs, and also a tuck-in acquisition that will bring with it 2 more campuses and a number of new programs that we will implement across our full campus footprint. And after all of that, we expect revenue to be solidly over 500 million and adjusted EBITDA to be in excess of 20% by fiscal 2025. So we're on a pretty significant growth trajectory. Next slide. So with the company strategy in place, my being new, having replaced an interim CFO who had been in the role for 18 months, finance and technology teams that had been operating in lights on mode for many years during those lean times, it was clear a transformation was needed. On the positive side, there was a tremendous amount of data readily available and well-established processes. And over the years, many reports had been developed capturing key data, both financial and operational. BI platform had been put in place to facilitate reporting for operational, marketing, student data, but no financial data. On the challenging side, we had many spreadsheets with financial and any kind of reporting that needed multiple data sources was all cobbled together by spreadsheets. We had redundant reports being developed across the finance and business teams for various stakeholders. Our ERP, student information system, CRM, were not integrated with our reporting and planning solution. Our close was 8 to 9 days, thus actionable management reporting was not available until around mid-month. Our annual budget was done at a bottoms-up level, but there was no established forecasting process. So we really just had a top-level spreadsheet projection model that didn't allow us to support any ongoing departmental accountability or provide dynamic updates or scenario planning. Our revenue planning model was immensely complex spreadsheet, feeding off significant amount of data from multiple sources. And we also had some work to do in the organizational model. We needed to better align with the various business needs and be able to efficiently scale the organization to support the company's growth strategy. So I led a major finance transformation in my prior company, thus had a broad roadmap in mind, but I needed help. So given all that, I over the last 12 to 18 months or so, I've added a few key internal resources and also engaged with Brian Samet and the Accordion team to help us build out our transformation roadmap and execute the transformation plan around the pillars identified on this slide. Next slide. So central to our transformation is technology enablement. So far, we've introduced BI reporting for standardized views around P&Ls, campus performance, and departmental and financial reporting, implemented a closed automation solution, and most significantly, we implemented the OneStream CPM solution, which just went live in mid-July. While a new ERP is also on our roadmap, we decided to implement CPM ahead of ERP as we felt it would be more immediately impactful by solving multiple challenges at once, including some of the reporting and data challenges of the accounting team. We had a very aggressive timeline. From initial requirements gathering to launch was roughly 7 to 8 months, and vendor selection to launch was about 4 to 5 months. We implemented a minimally viable product on time, so that mid-July timeframe was what we had from the very beginning to support our fiscal 2022 budget. We are a 9/30 fiscal year end. As well as several key reporting needs, included data integrations with ERP, payroll, and critical revenue and student data from our revenue planning model, as well as enhanced allocations and other key functionality. And for reference, we launched with approximately 100 users. With the tool, we simplified the approach for planning on many of the expense line items by introducing multiple driver and trending-based methodologies. And with more than 50% of our expenses being headcount related, we spent a significant amount of effort streamlining labor planning, both for existing and new headcount, as well as with the focus on business drivers and target utilization levels. And capital planning also being a focus given our growth investments, we spent measurable time on that module as well. We are executing a phased approach for additional capabilities, including integration with our student information system and CRM, automating our revenue planning model, and overall optimizing the tool to support additional reporting, rolling forecasts, long-range planning, cash and balance sheet forecasting, and potentially consolidations as we explore additional acquisition opportunities. And from a support perspective, we have a system admin in finance who started in late June, so was hired into the company in late June, with no OneStream experience and is already fully capable in the tool and a relatively low-cost third-party support contract. And IT provides oversight, particularly on the data integrations, but has no direct resources. So we're 1 month post go live, and I've already had multiple departmental budget reviews just this week. And I have to say, I'm incredibly pleased with the functionality and the transparency it has provided to our process and the ease of use, which has been widely commented on by the finance and end user community. And we have more work to do, but this is definitely a big success for our organization and other big steps towards executing on our transformation plan. So with that, I'll turn the call back over to Mike and the Accordion team.
Thanks, Troy. Really appreciate your time and testimonial there. I think a lot of what you described, hit on some of the philosophies that we talked about earlier, and it's awesome just to see it actually play out in reality. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, Dave.
Mike, I'll take it over from here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is Dave Collins. I'm with OneStream. I'm going to give a bit of a demonstration and some presentation on a way to attack CPM from a platform-based approach. I was really glad to hear what Troy had to say. I think it aligns very much with one of the slides that Mike talked about. During his presentation, I decided that this would be a great slide for me to anchor on the 5 points that he made about CPM solutions and how they align with private equity, and really how they align with other organizations too. The complexity, the rate of change, wanting to always have time to value, having transparency and control over the data is really not something you get with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets can be easy. They can be something that can be picked up and modified very quickly. However, a lot of mistakes are made. A lot of studies have gone into that. And as Troy pointed out, lean. So the ability to have a single resource with some IT intervention occasionally, that's certainly something we see with all of our customers. Let me move on to the next slide. A little bit of background and education. When you look at CPM, as Mike pointed out, you're really looking at 2 phases of it. You're looking backward at financial consolidation. You're also looking forward to do planning, budgeting, forecasting. And to tie this together, most organizations will layer in some form of reporting and perhaps dimensionalize the data so they can look by customer, by product, by channel, by entity, by account. But ultimately, you're trying to get information into the hands of the folks that either make decisions or trying to get a product out, work product out, that you need to get to a regulator or you need to get to the private equity firm that owns the portco. The challenge really is all of the integrations that are necessary, and this is where the time actually starts to increase. I've worked on many projects over the years, and in one of them, just the integration portion alone took months and months and months, actually 18 months worth of time. And that's far too much time. That's not a quick turnaround. That's not accommodating fast pace. So most organizations will start to leverage spreadsheets more and more because they're waiting. They need something right now. They'll start to rekey information, they'll copy and paste information, they'll dump information into spreadsheets. 4 numbers you see on screen are 4 workbooks that I have experienced over the last 15, 20 years. The first one, 25, was a 25 megabyte versus 52 megabyte or 97 megabyte or 127 megabyte workbook, where a CPG organization out of Minneapolis, publicly traded, I'll leave the name to you, were doing absolutely everything from a reporting perspective, a close perspective, a planning perspective in that workbook. And I modeled it in a piece of software and determined very quickly that they actually had several mistakes in it. And those mistakes unfortunately cost them because they wound up spinning off portions of the organization based upon the data found in those sheets. So what is OneStream all about? Well, we're a software company. We're a partner to Accordion. We're the provider and a partner to UTI. We focus on customer success. We want to make sure that Troy and all of our other customers are successful. We're not perfect. We recognize that, nobody is. We want to make sure and keep lines of communication open and make sure that we're doing our level best for those customers. And we focus on CPM in a different fashion. What we've done is actually taken everything inside. So not the fragmented set of solutions, applications, or modules. It's a single platform with a single application that does all the things we've been talking about on this session. With that platform-based approach, we also provide the ability to plug and play solutions from a marketplace, very much like the App Store for Apple or Google Play Store for Google, where you can go to a place in the cloud and download, configure, and deploy a solution. Productivity tools like guided reporting, which I'll show you, and task management. Financial close and reporting solutions like account reconciliations and transaction matching. And then getting out into planning and analysis, where I could do people planning, capital planning. All of these are plug and play. One of the ones that's been quite popular over the last 18 or so months, given the pandemic, was predictive analytics 1, 2, 3, where we leverage historical data and start to plot out what could happen going forward. And month by month, as new data, new information came in, that became tremendously valuable. So let me do a little bit of a demonstration. I am going to play 2 different personas. I'm going to start as the CEO of a fictitious company called Gulfstream. And what I want to see every day is what's going on. So I have my key performance indicators. I can see my sales. I can see my operating margin. I can see my return on assets, my return on equity. I've got a series of charts. If I needed more information, something behind the scenes, like for my EBITDA development, I simply click on that object, and now I am given what I saw on screen, but I'm also now given, for me, Houston, that's my responsibility. I can see what's below me, Houston Heights and South Houston, and I can see an explanation of what's going on. We store all of that content in the system, in the application, so that it's readily available. If I wanted to find out more about my return on assets or any of the other KPIs, I can simply click and take it even further, perhaps drilling down on that data. I'd like to find out more about my return on assets. And by drilling down on that, I see the 2 components that make that up and the math behind it. There's the formula. I'm curious about net income. So I double click to drill down. Earnings before taxes, double click to drill down. Earnings before interest, down to total operating income. And at some point, perhaps when I get down to net sales, let me just go to the bottom and see everything that's there. And now I'm seeing all the volume of, in this case, the third-party sales and other items that are coming in, pages and pages, reams of data that is stored in OneStream, but it's actually coming from the transaction systems down below. In many cases, this takes the place for many organizations of those spreadsheets that can be 25 megabytes, 127 megabytes. The advantage here is that I, as the user, can traverse the different forms of reporting that's important to me, and I can go down to tremendous levels of detail. We're not going to replace the data warehouse, as Mike pointed out, but we can bring in that size and scale of data so that you can see on an operational level what's going on without having to go to another solution. We're a manufacturer of golf equipment. We also service golf courses, meaning Gulfstream, the fictitious company in this demonstration. So right here, I can see the vendors that I work with to get supply. I can see the major raw materials that I'm using in that process, and I can see the manufacturing locations. I know that there's a hurricane on the way to Florida. I want to see what the impact might be. So I simply click on Florida and I get a complete picture now down to the invoice level of detail, what's going on. If I take this into my bookings and my billings, really the life's blood from a revenue perspective, from a financial health perspective. On the left-hand side, I can see all of the sales activity by sales rep and by sales rep by customer down below, where we're at month to date, where we're at on our target. Are we meeting our target as yet? On the right-hand side, I can see my billings and I can see my order to ship. From a billing standpoint, I see what my target is day by day, but I'm missing that target now mid-month. The key thing here is that performance management also tends to be a process that is end of period, either end of month or end of quarter or end of year. I need to see what's going on right now so that I can affect change, and I need to see it as quickly as possible. So I'm not just bringing in data monthly or quarterly or annually. I'm bringing it in on a readily available basis. And down below, if I look at my order to ship, I need to get the product out the door quickly so that I can send out that bill and I can actually get that revenue. And I'm missing that target as well. So this, the operational analytics side, aside from financial close and planning, budgeting, forecasting, the operational analytics side allows me to be proactive. It allows me to affect change quickly. Now, aside from dashboards, we have other forms of reporting as well. As an example, I might want to go off and produce a book of reports. Right here, I have multiple pages. I have my key data. Think of that as the KPIs I was showing you before. And if I page through some of these, there's my balance sheet for Houston with my actual versus my budget and variance. Then my income statement, operating expense detail, and on and on and on. Now, how did I get to that particular view of data? It's a PDF, but I actually have a solution in the marketplace called guided reporting. And if I click on that, it takes me directly to where I construct those reports. And it's a very quick and easy process. I simply decide what my columns are going to be, in this case, current month with all variances. I have a look at, say, the income statement, and it's going to produce for me live against the data sitting in the model, that income statement. And I can see all my comparisons there. I may want to get a very quick view into my account reconciliation process to see how well I'm doing. Right now, from a cash deposit perspective, we're not fully reconciled, and I can see exactly where we are reconciled and where we aren't, so I can affect change. Last thing that I want to do as the executive is set the stage for what my strategic plan is going to be. I want to create a target. A couple different things I can do. First, up above, I have drivers that'll set up my revenue growth, my gross profit. All of that is going to lead to what you see down below, my cash flow, from revenue all the way down to free cash flow. What I want to do is affect change quickly. So if I look at my by month final scenario, I see that I'm at almost 184 million. I think that's a bit high. So what I'm going to do is change that by modifying the data value directly. Let's set it at 181 million. And then let's save that. From a strat plan perspective, I am now building out that monthly view of the data. And when this is finished, I see that I have my new target for 2023. I'm going to go ahead and push this down now and align it with my budget process so that my Houston controller, I'm going to shift personas here in just a moment, can affect change at the budget level. This is a way of connecting those budget processes together. So let's change hats. As the Houston controller, I'm responsible for many different things: close and consolidation, regulatory reporting, compliance reporting, and the like. The task manager, which is a solution from the marketplace, provides a guided approach to workflow. And workflow for us is actually quite important. We have to be concerned about not just the software as a software company, we have to be concerned about people and process in order to make sure our customers are successful. And from our standpoint, on an actuals basis, I need to make sure that I am closing the various subledgers. I'm having meeting at the plant. I'm closing the general ledger, and then I can start to load the data in and get myself all the way through the process of closing the books and certifying it. If I shift to my budget process and tie that into the strat plan that my executive just set up, I have to create drivers, look at my revenue plan, my people plan, my travel plan. All of these are solutions from the marketplace. This portion here is the guided workflow that a partner of ours like Accordion will work with you to create on a best practices basis. So that again, we can have the people get through the process as effectively and efficiently as possible. So let's have a look at this. If I look at my enter plan drivers, I actually have a set of instructions. These can be printed as you see here. They can be video. I can go off and execute this process. It's going to take me directly to the workflow. Let me go ahead and close that window. Let's review where we're at. So my first step in the review is to look back at my target. That's the target that the executive just set, 181 million. Rather than passing spreadsheets around, having a system, an application with one set of data, one model that has all of this available for dozens to thousands of users makes a lot more sense. I'm a little bit low on my budget. So what I'm going to do is change first my revenue so that I get my sales up. Let's go to the revenue plan. Now there's many different things that I can do. I can get to a very granular level of detail. I can look at this by customer, by location. I can look at it by entity, by product, by time period. I'm going to do something very quick, very easy. I'm going to go ahead and set a new target. Right now, I'm just a little bit below $3 million. I'm going to go ahead and do a top-down allocation of, let's say, $5 million. Move that off to the side. That's finished. And so now what's going to happen is you will see that my budget, the baseline is maintained. This column a minute ago was completely empty. It's created adjustments now based upon the flow of the data for the actual budget itself. I've got to my target of 5 million. And if I go back to my review, you'll see that I'm actually increased now to 182.7, almost 183. I'm over my target. I'm good to go. Last step would be to look at the expense side of this. I might start with my drivers. What do my taxes look like? What about workers' comp? How about my various salary components by midpoint, by location? What about my travel drivers? If I'm planning for travel in the coming year, what does that expense look like for airfare, for hotel, for meals? Last, what about my balance sheet? My useful life, my maintenance costs? How about the cost of money? All of this is configurable per your given situation. And our partner Accordion would work with you to get that configuration in place. When it comes to people planning or travel planning or CapEx planning, again, it's an out-of-the-box solution that provides us with the ability to leverage those drivers, create the plan for you down to whatever granular level of detail is important, in this case, down to the employee, and then we provide you with some out-of-the-box analytics. So
yeah,
again,
I think,
time to value.
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Time to value is really the most important thing for the organizations these days, and we try to promote that as much as we possibly can. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Mike.
Thank you. So we went through a lot. The background around CPM, the value prop it has within the context of private equity backed portcos, and then even showed a demonstration. So we went through a lot in a very short period of time. I wanted to open it up for questions. I know we're right on the hour. There was one question in terms of, it says private equity sponsors have the modeling talent to make the spreadsheets work as an interim solution, but they don't make that talent readily available to the operating partners and supporting the C-suite. So yes, I've seen that obviously happen in many instances. Look, there are going to be instances, just given the timing, that spreadsheets are still going to be quicker and faster than standing up CPM solutions like we're talking about here. I think the point to say is while that might be a time advantage approach, in the context of value creation, the spreadsheets don't help at all. They provide visibility, but they don't actually help the value creation plan. Ultimately, strategically, we want to be looking at more of a value creation strategy, and that's where CPM kind of comes into play.
Mike, I would add real quick that in some of those very large workbooks, they oftentimes take days or weeks to prepare on a monthly basis, and that's just not fast enough to affect change quickly.
Exactly. And then the other one says, can OneStream model share accounts for EPS for publicly traded companies? Certainly that is something that can be modeled. I don't know, Dave, whether that would be a customization or something that's just core from a configuration perspective.
It's actually core from a configuration perspective. We have financial intelligence built into the platform to enable those types of calculations very quickly and easily. And we have over 800 customers in total, the likes of Walmart, Costco, Amazon, the very large ones, down to small to medium-sized customers as well.
Perfect. Those were the questions that I had up. So if there aren't any other questions, but happy to stay on longer. If you would like a follow-up on any of the information we shared today, again, apologize, we went through it very quickly. It was a lot. Feel free to reach out to me. Again, this is Mike Cochran. You've got my email address there. Happy to set up a follow-up discussion and dive into any one of these topics, even if it's just to explore one of the discussion points that we went through pretty quickly here in a little bit more detail. So I appreciate everybody's time in joining today. And once again, appreciate Troy's involvement on this call and carving off his very valuable time to speak to the solution that they implemented at Universal Technical Institute, and obviously Dave, our OneStream partner. So if there isn't anything else, I will close out the webinar. Thanks, everyone.